Well, here we are, and I want to wish a very happy anniversary to my bride, Susan. Today is our 36th wedding anniversary. 36 years ago today, we were married at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Catholic Church in Keller, Texas. And a lot has happened since then. It's been quite the journey. I'm very, very blessed and very pleased that I've been able to make it with such a wonderful lady. She's put up with me over the years, and we've raised 4 awesome children. Now we've got 2 grandkids. Anyway, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I'm glad that I've been at her side and she's been at my side for that time. So today is episode 16 of the Beezy's Stream of Consciousness. I am your host, Beezy, coming to you from the Starbase One studio on June 11th of 2024. So I just wanted to do something fun on today. I wanted to do what happened on this date with each of our 5-year anniversaries, starting with the day we got married, then 5 years later, so on and so forth. You get the idea. In addition to us tying the knot on June 11th, 1988, Galina Kristchikova of the former USSR set the long jump record, 24 feet, 8.5 inches. And then also in the sports world, the New York Yankees pitcher Rick Rhoden, formerly of Dodger fame, became the first pitcher since the DH rule to bat as a DH, not just as a pitcher. I thought that was a fun fact. He went 0-for-1 against the Baltimore Orioles in an 8-6 win. So that was what happened on the day we got married. 5 years later, on our 5-year anniversary, on June 11th, 1993, Jurassic Park opened. And it set, at that time, the box office record of $502 million take at the box office that weekend, which is pretty cool. I remember the first time we saw Jurassic Park. Susan doesn't like scary movies, and we were watching it at the time we were living in Austin. And anyway, Susan couldn't go to sleep that night. She kept me up all night because that movie freaked her out. Very, very good movie. Even a better book by Michael Crichton. One of these days we'll talk more about Dr. Crichton and all of his creations, his books, his TV shows, his movies, and all of that. He's a very interesting guy. He was taken from us way too soon, but he was very prolific while he was with us, and we'll talk about that. So 5 years after that, on our 10th wedding anniversary on June 11th, 1998, Compaq Computer paid $9.6 billion with a B dollars for digital entertainment, which at that time was the largest tech acquisition. That's a fun fact. Not so fun fact, on 5 years later, on June 11th, 2003, on our 15th anniversary, David Brinkley, NBC News anchor, long time, he passed. He was 82. 5 years after that, on our 20th wedding anniversary, June 11th, 2008, the number one song in the U.S. was Lollipop by Lil Wayne. I couldn't tell you how that tune went. I know who Lil Wayne is, but I'm unfamiliar with any of his music. The number one song in the UK was Singin' in the Rain by Mint Royale. Another one I couldn't pick out of the lineup, but there it is. Fun facts. 5 years later, on our 25th wedding anniversary, June 11th, 2013, Johnny Smith, a a cool jazz guitarist. He wrote and performed Moonlight in Vermont. He died, and he was 90. 5 years after that, on our 30th wedding anniversary, on June 11th, 2018, at the 72nd Tony Awards, the Best Musical Award went to The Band's Visit, and the Best Play went to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I'm unfamiliar with that. I'm unfamiliar with most of the Harry Potter legendarium, but I am not familiar with that, so I'd have to look that up. And then last year, on our 35th wedding anniversary, Gene Wicke, Swiss bobsledder, he passed. He was 89. He won gold for Switzerland in 72 in the four-man bobsled. 4 years prior to that, also in the four-man apparatus, he in '68 he won bronze. He again won bronze in '72 in the two-man bobsled. So that's some things that happened on our various wedding anniversaries. So thank you for that indulgence. And so anyway, happy anniversary to us. I've got a long chapter in Cloaks and Barbs to read to you, so let me get started on that here. Stand by. All right, here we go. We're going to do Chapter 6 of Cloaks and Barbs, so let's get started. B-17F, Lucky Strike, over the English Channel. Watch that crosswind, Gabby. We need to keep this heading for another 5 minutes. Grab her into the wind if you have to. Major Robert Crane checked his chart again and watched as his co-pilot, Captain Lester Gabby Gabowski, pushed the rudder of their B-17F a few degrees to the right. They had taken off with 49 other B-17s of the 8th Air Force from RAF Kim Bolton 30 minutes earlier on their way to drop incendiaries on the German industrial city of Stuttgart. The firebombing of Hamburg earlier in the month had proved so effective that General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th, had ordered more incendiary strikes deeper into Germany. This was Crane's 5th mission in Lucky Strike, B-17F, that thus far had lived up to her nickname. Sporting a bright silver finish, Lucky Strike derived her name from the image of a negligee-clad blonde woman sitting astride a bomb with a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes in her hand, emblazoned on either side of the bomber's nose. A balloon over the blonde's head stated, "So free and easy on the draw." 3 strategically placed 4-leaf clovers on her anatomy furthered the lucky theme of the name and image, and prior to each mission, the bomber crew would give the painting a quick pat before boarding the aircraft. "Okay, pilot to crew," Crane said over the intercom. "We're over the channel now. Gunners, test fire your weapons." Soon there came the chatter of 50 caliber machine guns being fired in the bomber's nose, waist, belly, and tail, as the crewmen fired a few rounds each to clear the actions of their weapons so they would be ready for the inevitable German fighters that they would encounter en route to Stuttgart. "Look sharp, boys," advised Crane. "As soon as we cross into Belgium, remember the briefing. Expect fighter resistance as soon as you cross the Belgian coastline." "I bet we've got a stool pigeon somewhere," groused Tech Sergeant Victor Norman, who pulled double duty as flight engineer behind the cockpit and as upper gunner in the dorsal turret a few feet aft. "A stoolie, you said?" asked Skabowski as he watched the Belgian coastline approach in the windshield. "Yes, sir. I'll bet there's Nazi spies in Huntington just watching us take off every morning. It's only 8 miles from the town to the airfield. That's why we're getting all hell pounded out of us these days." "Makes sense," the co-pilot agreed. The bombers of the 8th had been taking heavy losses to German fighter aircraft of late, much more than Allied intelligence could write off to bad luck or greater numbers of forward-stage German fighter bases. The bombers were now getting hit with fighters as soon as they crossed the coast, rather than encountering them deeper into Germany and occupied France. "I don't know about that," Crane said. "I'm hearing from the intelligence boys that it might be a U-boat somewhere in the channel." "Well, if it is, sir, then maybe the Navy pukes ought to take it out." "I'm sure they're working on it, Sarge," Crane said evenly. "Keep your eyes on number 2 for me. It's been running a little hot during the last 2 hops." "Yes, sir." Norman returned to his gauges. "Now, ain't that something?" came a voice over the intercom. "Tail gunner to pilot. I've got what looks like a shooting star at 4 o'clock high." Crane and Gabowski shared a look. "Say again, Frenchie?" Crane called. "I swear, sir, it looks like a big chunk of burning rock falling this way," said Staff Sergeant Billy French from his place at the very rear of the fuselage. "Can you see it, Norman?" asked Crane. Norman climbed from his flight engineer's station up into the dorsal turret. He turned to look aft and immediately whistled. "Holy smokes," he said excitedly. "It's like one of them Foo Fighters, sir, except it's on fire." "Can you see anything, Gabby?" Crane asked. Gabowski twisted in his seat and craned his neck to see. "Yep, I got it," he said at last. "It looks like a meteor, a big one too, sir, about the size of a city bus or better." "How far away is it?" "It's going to pass over us, I think," Gabowski said. "If we just hold our course, I think we'll be all right." Soon Crane could hear the excited calls of pilots and radio operators from the other bombers in the formation. "Look at that! What is it? Maybe it'll hit Berlin and we can all go home." Finally, Colonel Richard Jacobson, the lead bomber, called out, "Okay, boys, knock it off. We're almost to the coast, and we're going to have a hell of a lot more to worry about than a damn meteor. It's just a burning piece of space rock, that's all. Somebody was right. It looks like it's headed for Berlin. Maybe it'll knock old Schickelgruber in his head and end this thing so we can all go to the Pacific." "Amen to that," said Crane quietly. "You really want to go to the Pacific?" asked Gabowski. "Put a sock in it, Gabby." It was just a matter of minutes before French said over the intercom, "Here it comes, boys. Hold on to your hats." There were various exclamations from throughout the bomber as a large burning spherical object roared a mere 75 feet above the formation. Crane could see that it was indeed large. He estimated later in his after-action report that it had a greater diameter than the nearly 104-foot wingspan of the B-17, and it was burning fiercely, training a fiery tail that stretched at least 3 miles behind it. It flew into the clouds 500 feet below the bombers and was gone. "That's going to put an awful dent in some Kraut's front lawn," deadpanned the bombardier, Lieutenant John McKinney, after the object disappeared. "Let's hope so," said Crane. "Okay, fellas," said Colonel Jacobs to the formation. "Show's over. We're feet wet now, so keep your eyes open for the Emmels and the butcher birds." The formation continued onward, turning slightly to a more southerly coast while the burning sphere roared through the clouds northward. Approaching Lundy Island, Bristol Channel. He was making better time now that he had the boat, although the seas here were choppy and made the journey somewhat difficult. He could have swam it, but with time being so short, he was forced to use whatever means necessary to reach his destination. The trip to the coastal village had been a long, bumpy one, and having to listen to the old male and female husbandman prattle on and on had taxed his patience. Fortunately, when he had repaired the truck engine, he had energized it such that they did not need to stop to refuel. Of course, the humans did not understand how such a thing was possible, but it did not matter. His race's command of machinery and ability to induce locomotion were more than mere conveniences. In any event, as soon as he spied the coastal village in the darkness ahead, he had leapt off the truck and vanished into the hedgerows at the edge of town. Then it was a simple matter of finding a vessel tied to one of the myriad piers on the edge of the water and appropriating it. The one he had found had high-performance engines that utilized the light petroleum-based fuel, which would make for better speed than the larger ones that employed the oil-based heavy-duty motors. This one was a simple twin-engine model with an enclosure forward that he could use if necessary. Within the enclosure there were various clothing items which he quickly utilized and which enabled him to dispose of the uncomfortable and malodorous rag of the husbandman. Now, with the sun climbing in the sky, he was rapidly approaching a small island that sat in the middle of the channel between the coastal village and his destination. He would give the island a wide berth, as he did not want any further contacts until he made landfall at the village called Swansea. He noted the passage of the contact group with their sphere in the sky to the south. He made mental contact with them as they entered the planet's atmosphere and informed them of his change in plans. There was some mild surprise on their part that he would alter his mission of his own accord, but after using their sight to see into the possible futures, they agreed that such a change was in their best interests. The boat's twin engines were laboring, but he knew that they could stand the strain and get him to his destination. There was a storm building over the island nation's northern province, and he wanted to be out of the water and back on land before he encountered it. He patiently waited as the little boat ate up the distance and turned the rudder a few degrees to pass the mid-channel island. Wolfschanze, the wolf's lair, Forst Gorlitz, East Prussia. Hitler walked among the trees outside his wolf's lair in East Prussia. Eva had remained behind in Berlin, ostensibly to do some shopping and attend a few cinema shows, and her absence made Hitler edgy and nervous. He would have preferred to have her here with him at his Eastern Front headquarters, but she hated the place and would not come. Instead, he had to be content to travel with Bormann and Blondie. Göring was already here, having left his beloved Karenhall retreat south of Berlin, as were Keitel, Rommel, Donitz, Mengele, Himmler, and about a dozen other military commanders whom Hitler wanted present when der Besucher, the visitors, showed themselves. Goebbels had left the Vorbunker in an evil mood and rebuffed Hitler's request that he too be present. "You worry about the Kampf, Wolf," he told Hitler privately, "and leave the Volk to me." He was even now somewhere in the staff car racing to a party rally in Aachen, hoping to shore up support for the war by continuing his public tirades against the enemy of the Reich, Jews, Catholics, gypsies, homosexuals, and other subversives. Hitler was unhappy to see him leave, especially in such a mood. "He will be all right," Bormann had assured him. "The Aachen meeting is important, and he will return in better spirits. You need him there. He is not needed at Wolfschanze." Hitler was not so sure. The giddy optimism that he had upon receiving the latest communique from der Besucher had given way to a brooding gloom, exacerbated by the absence of Braun. Bormann noted that Hitler's mood was markedly darker when she was not present. He would fret and worry, and his manner would become that of one who can no longer see the dawn, but instead labors in darkness. Bormann was becoming increasingly aware that Hitler could not function without his inner circle. With Goebbels in Aachen and Braun in Berlin, Bormann would have to be his Führer's strength, conscience, and ego when he met with the Besucher. Otherwise, the Chancellor's mind would fragment, as it often did under pressure. For his part, Bormann wanted this meeting to go well. He felt that these strange visitors were exactly what the Reich needed to defeat the Allies. He also felt, rather ominously, that they would turn on Germany as quick as thinking if Hitler was allowed to fall into one of his manic moods. Now he walked by his leader's side as Blondie forged ahead in the undergrowth. Hitler was wearing a brown suit with white shirt and dark brown tie, and he had a wide-brimmed felt hat on his head. He had his hands clasped behind his back as he walked slowly, almost aimlessly, following Blondie's lead. Normally, Hitler would not venture out into the woods, despite there being 2 full companies of elite SS soldiers patrolling among the trees, as well as a brigade of Army Group South regulars, along with their equipment on the roads leading down to the hamlet of Gorlitz. However, he seemed restless inside the headquarters. His audiences with his generals and aides seemed half-hearted affairs on his part. Bormann thought he seemed unusually preoccupied. Hitler kicked at some rocks as he walked, almost like a child would, and Bormann could see his lips moving soundlessly. He wondered at this and ventured a question. "Mein Führer," he said gently, "are you well today?" Hitler stopped walking and turned to look at his secretary. "Yes," he said quickly, and then added, "No. No, Martin. I am not well at all. I am unsure of how to proceed if things do not go well with our visitors." Bormann frowned. Why would they not go well? Hitler looked up into the trees and squinted at the sunlight coming down in beams through the leaves. "This is something quite outside of my experience," he said at length. "I feel as if we have stepped off of the path of our destiny and into, something else altogether." He lowered his head and shook it. "This entire business has me unsure of myself. I can deal with men, Martin, but these things." His voice trailed off, and he toed a small rock on the path with his boot. He picked it up and tossed it idly in his hand. "You see this stone, Martin? I'll warrant that it has been here for many, many years, long before you or I were born. In fact, I'll wager you that it has been here, in Prussia, for thousands of years, just sitting in this place, as nations have risen and fallen around it, oblivious to it all. I wonder what it could tell us if it could speak. Perhaps Frederick the Great himself stood in this very spot and looked down on this little rock. Who knows? Who knows indeed, my Führer? It is merely a stone, though, and it cannot shape its course as we can." Hitler nodded and clutched the stone. No, it cannot. You are correct. However, it is here after all these years, and it will be here long after you and I are gone. It will endure, Martin. It will endure. As will our Reich, Bormann said confidently. Our Reich will last 1,000 years, my Fuhrer. Perhaps, Hitler said softly as he studied the mineral. And after those 1,000 years, our little friend will still be here watching and waiting. Think about that for a moment, Martin. Blondie, who was nosing in the bracken at the foot of a great oak a few yards away, raised her head and looked up into the trees. She began growling softly yet menacingly, and the hairs on her great broad back bristled. Hitler pocketed the stone and looked at her. Blondie, he called. What is it? What do you smell? The dog's ears were erect as she looked up. Soon her growling gave way to barking, and both men were aware of a low rumbling in the sky behind them in the south. Is it an air raid? Hitler asked. Bormann immediately stepped over to his side and took him by the arm. If it is, then we must get you into the bunker, he said quickly. He gave a shrill whistle that hurt Hitler's ears, and immediately 2 uniformed SS soldiers appeared from their places among the trees further up the path. Bormann turned and pulled Hitler back towards the headquarters building. The soldiers ran up, puffing with their equipment bags slapping against their backs. What is it, Party Kanzler? One of them asked. Is the Fuhrer ill? Nein, replied Bormann. Come, we must get him back into the building. Do you not hear the sound? As they made their way hurriedly back up the path, the sound was unmistakable. Blondie was barking furiously, but the men could hear what sounded like a great locomotive in the sky above them. As they passed out from underneath the trees into the glade in front of the headquarters building, one of them looked up and pointed. Look, he cried. Overhead and approaching them like a fiery portent of doom was a great round shape consumed by a bright fire. Even as they crossed the glade and hustled their leader into a side door leading down to the underground bunker, the shape passed overhead with a loud, lingering rumble and disappeared into the trees to the north. The soldiers shut and sealed the door behind them, and they ran down the stairs into the Wolf's Lair underground air raid shelter. Suddenly they felt the ground beneath them heave and tremble, and they were all thrown from their feet. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the lights in the shelter flickered and went dark. Like thunder after a lightning strike, a low boom rolled over them, one they could feel in their very bones. Somewhere in the darkness, Blondie whimpered. RAF Lynham, Wiltshire, England. That weather system over Traeger looks like it's finally breaking up, Colonel, said the British controller in the tower 500 yards away. Coast watchers report that the rain is letting up and the clouds are breaking. You are cleared for takeoff on runway 17 left. Winds are from the south at 10 knots. Godspeed, lads. That's about damn time, grumbled Lieutenant Colonel Randall Cook in Snake in the Grass, the lead ship in a 75-plane raid scheduled to hit the railway marshalling yards at Rowan Stodway in Brittany. It was supposed to be a quick hit-and-run raid there and back in a few hours, but poor weather over Brittany had delayed takeoff for nearly 3 hours. Now, moments before time ran out and the mission was to be scrubbed, the British meteorologists had finally given their imprimatur to the effort. Snake in the Grass is rolling, Cook told the tower as he firewalled his 4 engines. In moments he rotated his flying fortress off of the British runway and was soon orbiting the field as the rest of his squadron formed up. 10 minutes later, with the rest of his formation in the air with him, he turned the big silver Boeing and headed southwest. 30 miles south of Torbay, Devon, the English Channel. The bearded man sat in the small boat, smoking a wide, bowled pipe and holding an unusually long fishing rod in his hands. On his head was a tall, shapeless bag with a wide brim that shielded his eyes. A tackle box and a metal cooler sat in the bilge of the boat at his feet. A length of chain attached to the forward gunwale and disappearing into the choppy waters of the channel below him bespoke of a sea anchor. He tipped a brown bottle to his lips and took a swig of mineral water. The clouds overhead were breaking up and shafts of sunlight were now slanting down to the surface of the water. Presently he heard a distant growl coming from the English coast. Squinting into the light, he could see phalanxes of aircraft appearing over the horizon to his northeast. In time, they were passing directly overhead, and he could discern that they were 4 engine types with tall vertical stabilizers. He carefully counted the number of aircraft and noted their direction, verifying it with a compass he had strapped to his left wrist. He made several notations in a small notebook on a string around his neck that he kept beneath his tunic and waited until the last of the aircraft passed over his position. As the roar of the aircraft receded in the distance, he opened his tackle box and pulled out a microphone, trailing a waterproof cable. He carefully placed the fishing rod into a hole in the gunnel and adjusted some dials on the base of the tackle box. He then read his notations into the microphone for a few moments. When he was done speaking, he replaced the microphone, closed the box, and retrieved the fishing rod. Santiago 4. Ensign Catherine Reese handed the message form back to Barbara as soon as she recorded the signals. They had appeared on the southern net, very faint but readable. Barbara rapidly scanned the signals and noted with relief that they were in a code that had long been compromised. She did the translation herself and summoned Hawthorne. "Air raid warning, eh?" he asked after he had read it. "I'll kick this one upstairs straight away. Your Air Force chaps will go berserk with this one, they will." "That one has to be a German picket in the channel, or I'll eat my hat," Barbara said. "There's no way a raid could get underway from Lynham, and a half hour later somebody's transmitting the information from down south." "Aye, lass," agreed Hawthorne. "You're right on there." He looked sharply at the original message form. "This bearing is correct now? If it is, then it's almost due south of us, just south of Devon, as it were." "You can check the tape yourself, sir," Barbara replied. "Nay, lass," he said, patting her shoulder. "I believe you. Well done. Station X." "Air raid warning from an agent in the channel, sir," said Petty Officer Kent. "Santiago 4 picked it up within the hour, and it dovetails with what Lieutenant Shiva has been saying about the activity off the coast." She handed the form to Seymour, who reviewed it around sips of tea. "A small raid left Lynham right before this was caught," she said, pointing to the pertinent parts of the message. Seymour made assenting noises in his throat and nodded thoughtfully. "Right," he said at last. "This is a job for the Admiralty. Have Miss Smithers get Lord Chapman on the secure telephone for me. There's a good fellow." Kent left, and a minute or two later, the red secure telephone on Admiral Seymour's desk began ringing. He picked it up with a flourish. "Stanley," he boomed into the receiver, "I believe we have a mole somewhere south in the channel. Eh? South of Devon or so, we think. I'll get back to you on the details later, lad, but could you have an asset look into it straight away? I'm afraid it's rather time sensitive, and I understand the RAF lads have something laid on tonight out of South Kearney, which will put the Lancasters right over this little shite. Our chaps will find themselves in the middle of a right gorgeous punch-up if the Jerrys know what's coming. You'd be doing us all a favor if you could take him out, or at least drive him off for a while." "The Yanks? Do you mean that we don't have a single British asset in the area?" "Oh, yes, I see. Splendid. I'll leave it with you, then." 4 Skorlitz, East Prussia. The sphere gouged a furrow in the earth over a kilometer long, and the concussion of its impact flattened trees in a 2-kilometer radius. The simple townsfolk of nearby 4 Skorlitz thought that the end of the world had come, and they shut themselves up in their tiny hovels and small businesses. The local fire brigade, however, bravely hitched a team to their single fire engine and set out following the sphere's path. Behind them, mechanized units of Army Group South followed, while leg infantry units brought up the rear guard. They found a large red-hot orb about 3 kilometers south of town, nearly 3/4 of it buried in the rich brown earth. It was much too hot to approach, and the small amount of water that the horse-drawn fire engine could produce only generated copious amounts of steam that further reduced visibility. Less than half an hour later, the local firemen and the soldiers were shocked to see the sphere glow briefly green. The commanding officer of the Army detachment, Oberst Werner Hahn, ordered everyone back 50 meters and waited. The sphere continued to glow and began to pulse rhythmically, giving off a deep sound that was painful to the ears. Soon, the pulsing subsided, and Hahn watched as a doorway in the sphere surface opened. 3 black-robed figures emerged from the opening and strode purposefully through the blackened earth and the tree stumps. They were quite tall, nearly 3 meters tall, each of them, but they were so fully cloaked that he could not see their hands or their faces. "Stay where you are," he called to them when they were less than 20 meters away. Soldiers under his command quickly hemmed in the strangers, looking at them fearfully from under their helmets. "The Chancellor is expecting us," said the closest hooded figure. "We are associates of Herr Bote, whom your Chancellor once knew. You will take us to him now." Hahn had been briefed the day before by the Fuhrer himself regarding Der Besucher, and had heard tales of Herr Bote from other officers, so he was not completely taken aback. These tall strangers, however, sent his neck hairs prickling and his skin crawling. You will ride with me, he said loudly, but fear crept into his voice. A private brought his car up, and the three visitors climbed in. Soon they were motoring back through town and presently pulled up to the north entrance of the Wolf's Lair. Follow me, he said curtly, and he led them into the wooden headquarters building. The strangers followed silently. After climbing several sets of stairs and leading them around several corners and down several corridors, he finally stopped before a pair of heavy oaken doors. They opened from within, and he gestured the visitors inside. They found themselves in a large, long room dominated by a huge marble conference table around which were seated several men. At the head of the table, the Chancellor of the Third Reich of Germany stood up. Leave us, Oberst Hahn, he said. Hahn withdrew, closing the door silently behind him. Welcome to the Wolf's Lair, gentlemen, said the Chancellor, his mustache quivering on his lip. I am the Fuhrer of the greater German state, the Third Reich. The foremost of the strangers took a step forward. You may refer to me as Sayer, he said ominously, and then gestured to his comrades. This one you may call Oracle, and this one Warziger. Now, Chancellor, I trust that my associates and I will not meet the same fate as the one you called Bote. That would be unfortunate. That depends, Hitler said haughtily. Sayer, Oracle, and Warziger, eh? Seer, Oracle, and Soothsayer. Very interesting names. Well, gentlemen, you asked for this meeting, not I. Twice now you have said that you can help the Reich defeat the Allies. That is correct. Hitler sat down and smoothed back his oily hair. He leaned forward intently, and his dark eyes flashed. Enlighten us, then, he said. Please. USS Barb. Scope is clear, Matthews said. Raise the masts. It was near dusk, and Barb was motoring at periscope depth near the middle of the English Channel, south of Plymouth and northwest of Guernsey Island. It was the eastern edge of her assigned kill box, and Matthews had them proceeding north at 2 knots. Dunaway relayed the order to the quartermaster, who raised the boat's UHF antenna as well as her radar transceiver. Let's see what we can see, he said to the conning tower crew as he waited for the radar unit to power up and make a couple of sweeps. Matthews continued to scan the area visually through the search periscope. Okay, looks like we got something here, he said after the radar made 2 sweeps. Not much of a return, Skipper, but it's there. Give me a bearing, Robert. Let's say 035 relative, Dunaway replied after a few moments. Okay. Matthews turned the periscope to the appropriate bearing and adjusted the magnification. Tell me what you see. He pulled Dunaway back from the radar repeater and moved him so he could look through the periscope without jarring it. Seas aren't too choppy, he said. I'd say about 1.5 feet. That's damn near glass calm around here, said Chief O'Brien from his place by the TDC. Isn't that the truth? In this twilight, it's hard to see anything on the surface, but... Wait a minute. He grabbed the periscope handles and adjusted the controls a bit. Yeah, I got it, Skipper. Looks like a skiff or a rowboat. In the middle of the channel? Matthews put his eyes to the cups and squinted. Okay, I see it. Looks like some old bastard out there fishing. He looked at Dunaway. Did the Brits really do stuff like that? I don't know, Skipper. You said it yourself. They're a weird bunch. Excuse me, sirs, said radio man Norris, poking his head up into the conning tower. Message for the skipper. He handed a message for him and disappeared back into the control room. Keep an eye on that boat, Robert, Matthews said as he read the message. That's it, he exclaimed after he finished reading. Dunaway took his eyes away from the cup and looked at the captain, who thrust the paper at him. As he read it, Matthews said, Lower the mast. Drop the scope down 3 feet. All stop. Quiet the boat. I don't want to spook this guy. Dunaway looked up from the message after relaying the orders. You got to be kidding me, Skipper, he said quietly. That old fisherman is a stool pigeon? It's got to be. Matthews continued watching the skiff, although now he had to sit on the floor of the conning tower to see through the periscope. HQ says we've got a picket out here, and the only thing we find is a guy in a rowboat in the middle of the damn channel. How do you explain it? I told you they had a stoolie out here. Dunaway looked at Chief O'Brien, and both men simply shrugged at each other. I guess I missed that particular briefing, Skipper, he said lamely. Okay, here's the drill. You take a guy, you give him some radio gear, and you put him in a small boat, right? Now, below the rowboat is a submerged U-boat. The guy in the service makes like he's fishing or whatever, but when the bombers pass over, he makes a little telephone call to the coast watchers in France or Belgium. That way, our guys have a reception committee waiting for them when they cross over the continent. Then, when night comes, U-boat services collects the guy so he can eat and sleep. Then they put the guy back up the next day, and so on and on. Got it? Well, makes sense to me, Dunaway said. It's so simple that it's brilliant. Yeah, and it's costing us bombers and Airedales every damn day. All right, let's get this figured out. That U-boat that's in the neighborhood, you can put that in the bank. Sonar, con. Give me a listen on 035 relative. I'll bet you even money she's sitting there, right underneath our friend in the skiff. He waited while Norris and the sonar watchstanders turned the sonar heads to listen in on that particular bearing. Sonar reports noise on that bearing, but no signature for an ID, sir, reported the conning tower talker. Why don't we surface and blow that little rowboat out of the water, asked O'Brien. Oh, we'll do that, Matthews said coldly. But I want the real prize. I want that U-boat. He looked at the two submarine silhouettes one of the signalmen had painted on the conning tower bulkhead near the TDC. I want to put a third boat on that bulkhead, gentlemen. You got enough of an idea for a rough track? He asked Dunaway. Blind shot? The executive officer asked. I guarantee you they're no more than 100 feet down. More likely they're at periscope depth right underneath that guy. It should be a simple setup. We know the bearing, we know the depth, we know the distance. He nodded and smiled. Fire up the TDC, boys. Dunaway and O'Brien began feeding coordinates and bearing numbers into the TDC while Matthews listened to his own boat. The ventilator fans were off, as were all non-essential electrical motors. Men spoke in whispers, if at all. He smiled. His boat sounded like an empty grave. There was no way the Germans could know that Barb was nearby. U-534. Forgotten Captain Franz Wirtz stood outside the sonar shack and waited. His two sonarmen were listening intently to their headphones as they moved the sonar head back and forth. It's no good, sir, said Petty Officer Helmut Gruber after a few minutes. I could have sworn there was some noise to the southwest not 5 minutes ago, but now there's nothing. It was close. Yes, sir. I would say less than 10 kilometers away. And what exactly did you hear? I heard very faint screw noises, Herr Captain. Seaman First Class Klaus Bosch spoke up. I thought I heard mechanical transients as well. Wirtz's executive officer, Hermann von Kuiper, emerged from the aft hatch with a couple of oranges in his hands and handed Wirtz one. Danke, Hermann, Wirtz said as he bit into the fruit and began peeling it. He looked at von Kuiper. What do you think? Is it a Tommy boat out there? Von Kuiper took a bite and chewed noisily. It cannot be one of our boats, he said. They're all further inshore. There's nothing on the surface. Metz would have seen anything from his place in the skiff, and we are too close to the British coast. He lowered his voice and whispered in Wirtz's ear. We've been on station too long here, he hissed. We are tempting fate now. Wirtz motioned for von Kuiper to follow him aft into the control room. Keep me informed, Gruber, he said over his shoulder. He stood at the periscope pedestal and looked at von Kuiper. What do you suggest, Herman? He asked softly as he leaned against the attack scope. If there's an enemy boat out there, what then? If we move, we'll be heard. If we sit tight and stay quiet, perhaps they will not know that we are here and miss us altogether. Of course, there will be others. We are too close to the coast. Wirtz leaned his head against the shiny oil periscope shaft. I'm tired, Herman, he whispered. Tired in my very bones. I've been playing this cat and mouse game now for 3 years, and I long for the day when going to sea shall again be a peaceful exercise. He looked up and took the entire control room in with his eyes. All these young boys, Herman, 6 months or so ago, they were all working on farms in Dusseldorf, Hanover, or Dresden. Now they're stuck in a 77-meter-long metal pipe under the water playing a deadly game with the British and Americans, hoping that their Capitan doesn't get them killed into the bargain. Ach. Von Kuiper nodded. This is the Kriegsmarine best boat, my Capitan, he whispered. The best boat with the best Capitan and the best crew. That is why we are given such duty when all the other boats have been recalled. I have been with you since the beginning, have I not? I was with you when we hunted freely in the Atlantic, sinking Allied merchant ships and emasculating the Tommies during the happy time. I was with you when we put 3 torpedoes into the British carrier off the coast of Scotland. Together, we have sunk more shipping than all but 3 other U-boats. Think about that, Herr Captain, and dismiss your fatigue. These boys, These men, your men, and the fatherland need you now. Wirtz sighed. Very well, Herman, he said, looking at his first officer with red-rimmed eyes. Did you ever hunt back in the Black Forest when you were a boy? Of course, sir. My father and I hunted birds many times. And you used bird dogs, did you not, to flush the game? Von Kuiper thought for a moment, and then he chuckled softly. We did indeed, Herr Capitan. I understand. Wolf Schanze. Darkness was beginning to fall over Forest Gorlitz when the three black-clad visitors finally finished their presentation. The assembled members of the Nazi High Command sat in stunned silence for a long while. Many of the men who were smokers left their cigarettes, cigars, and pipes to burn unattended in the crystal ashtrays scattered over the conference table. Pots of tea and trays of snacks were likewise ignored. At length, Hitler cleared his throat. Yes, well, he stammered. Thank you, gentlemen. He blotted his brow nervously with a scarlet handkerchief. Perhaps the three of you could wait in the anteroom while we consider your... Chancellor, said Sayre, that will not be necessary. Since we have the site, secret deliberations are no longer secret. We know what you will say. The one called Rommel, began Oracle, does not care for us and feels that we are a threat. He will counsel caution at least and a covert attack on us at worst. I believe that you will find, Chancellor, he is an able field commander, but this matter is quite over his head. Rommel stirred in his chair, but said nothing. The large one named Goring would like nothing better than to see England crushed and America humiliated. Like you, Chancellor, he pines for the days of Teutonic glory, and he will counsel that you accept our offer. Goring shifted his bulk uneasily, but kept his peace. Your armed forces commander, Keitel, is a sycophant and will follow your lead, Chancellor. He will offer nothing of substance to the discussion. Keitel leaned forward indignantly, but only scowled. Donitz, however, appears to have some intelligence in this matter. The Admiral's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He will tell you that an alliance with us carries great risk for your country, although in the short term, it will guarantee your victory in this conflict. He is right on both counts. The so-called scientist Mengele is both horrified and fascinated by our physiology and will counsel you to proceed, if for no other reason than for him to continue to study us. Mengele was looking down at the table and did not move. The one named Himmler is quite like us, we find, as he has a singleness of purpose and does not allow distractions to interfere with his methods. Himmler, steely-eyed and inscrutable, leaned forward in his chair. And what will I say? He asked. You will vote to proceed with us, said Warziger, who had heretofore been silent. You see great opportunity in our alliance. And what of the danger I sense? You humans have an axiom that would be appropriate here, said Sayre. You, Himmler, would say that any danger for your country in this enterprise is simply the cost of doing business. A practical, if somewhat provincial, outlook. The risk is worth the reward, said Bormann from his place at Hitler's side. Yes, Bormann, said Oracle. You too are a sycophant, but a calculating one. You truly love your Chancellor, which we do not understand, but you are willing to follow him into death if necessary, and if that is where he goes. Your vote will be to do your master's will. Do I not have a say in this? Asked Hitler suddenly, smacking the table with the heel of his hand. Of course, Chancellor, said Sayre smoothly. You have the overriding input here. After hearing the pleas of your subordinates, you will delay deciding. You will consult your woman, your astrologer, and several other staff members, your canine companion even, and still you will be torn. You will see the opportunity of a lifetime before you, a chance for your nation and your people to become preeminent in this world of yours. You will see a chance to purify your people once and for all, a chance to cleanse your race of all impurities. Ironic, put in Oracle, since you yourself are not pure. There were gasps around the table. Goring turned with some difficulty and looked squarely at Hitler. Are you going to sit still for that, mein Führer? You mind your tongue, Herr Oracle, when you are here, said Himmler poisonously. All eyes turned to Hitler, who was purple-faced with rage. His upper lip and tiny mustache quivered, and his face contorted with anger, until it was a mask horrible to behold. We only speak the truth, Sayre said evenly. Seeing that his master was about to lose control, Bormann leaned over to speak quietly in his ear. Let it go, mein Führer. Consider what they are offering it. Silence! Roared Hitler, turning on the secretary. Be still! He turned back to face the visitors. I will not be insulted so in my own house, he spat. This decision is mine to make and no one else's. That much is obvious, said Sayre, unmoved by the Chancellor's emotion. So, how do you decide? Do you accept our offer or not? Guards! He thundered. The doors opened immediately, and 4 SS soldiers bustled in, their submachine guns cocked and ready. Take our visitors to the lounge, he ordered as he ran a trembling hand through his hair. We will send for them when we are ready. Consider well, Chancellor, but know that your time is short, warned Sayre. We require your reply before your sun rises again. Before Hitler could reply, the 3 strangers turned and left the chamber. After they had left and the doors were once again shut, all eyes turned to the Chancellor. His face was still flushed, his eyes wild and his breathing rapid like a cornered animal. Gradually his breathing slowed, and a spasm of pain seemed to cross his face. His features softened somewhat, and he sat back in his chair. He smoothed back his hair yet again and mopped his face. Well, he said at last, were they correct in their assessments of you men? Can they indeed see the future? Obviously, they can read our hearts, Goring said. Whether or not they can see the future is debatable, despite naming themselves as prophets and seers. For my part, I do not believe such nonsense. The obvious question that needs to be answered here this evening is, can they indeed help us defeat the Allies? A race from another world with the powers to travel up to our Earth would make a powerful ally, said Himmler. There is no doubt that they command great power, and from what I have heard about this Bote, he did correctly foresee the firebombing of Hamburg. If they all have such a gift, then we must listen to them with care. What of their terms, Keitel said. Are we comfortable with the idea of them occupying the British Isles? Nothing about these creatures makes me comfortable, Donitz put in. They are a danger to humanity, whether German, British, or American. An alliance with them would bring us victory today, but what of tomorrow? There were murmurs of assent all around the table, which Hitler watched in silence. What could there be in Scotland that they covet so? Asked Rommel. They were not completely open with us on that point. There is nothing of value in Scotland, Goring snorted. The Scotch are a worthless race. You did not have to fight their Highlanders in North Africa, Herman, Rommel retorted. If you had, you would not make such idiotic comments. He lit a cigarette and puffed on it contemptuously while Goring's face reddened. No, I should be very interested to know what exactly they want in Scotland. Why? Asked Bormann. Perhaps whatever they seek could be of greater use to us, eh? Rommel's eyes narrowed as he took another drag. Perhaps the Allies are even now at work on a super weapon of their own, one perhaps that they will unleash when they make their invasion of the continent. That statement had a very sobering effect on all of them, and they all sat brooding in their own thoughts for a few moments. Have our operatives in Scotland seen anything to indicate such a weapon exists? Hitler asked. Nein, said Himmler, shaking his head primly. The closest thing any nation has to a super weapon involves atomics, and the British do not have the resources for such an undertaking. But the Americans do, interjected Keitel. Did you notice that our visitors said very little about the Americans? Rommel asked pointedly. They seemed to be content to drive America out of Britain. They said nothing about pursuing America across the Atlantic. Perhaps they have something else planned for America, suggested Goring. She has declared war on us, so merely moving her back over the Atlantic would prolong the conflict. My agents tell me that even now, the Americans are testing a super bomber that is capable of flying from Newfoundland to Berlin and back. Impossible, scoffed Donitz. It will require so much fuel. Gentlemen, interrupted Hitler, let us keep to the matter at hand. They have made their offer. Do we accept it or not? Shall we put it to a vote? Asked Rommel. All right, said Hitler. I shall let you vote. All in favor of accepting the offer of der Bestucher. Bormann, Keitel, Mengele, and Himmler all raised their hands. Karl, Hermann, Edwin, you oppose? With respects, mein Führer, Donitz said. I abstain. Why? Nothing good will come from an alliance with these creatures, he said simply. I would rather take my chances with what we have here. The winds of war blow in many directions. Since we cannot see the future, then I would say we should not mortgage it with an ally that we cannot trust. Hitler nodded and turned to Goring. Herman, I thought you were in favor of an alliance. Goring folded his broad hands across his considerable belly and sat back. At first I was, but I agree with Karl on this, mein Führer. I would rather my German flyers, Keitel's German soldiers, and Karl's German sailors take the fight to the Allies. Let us win or lose with our own people. Well said, Rommel breathed. What do you say, Edwin? Hitler asked. You think our visitors are dangerous? Absolutely, Rommel said. This is an alliance of convenience, nothing more. Let us be honest in our assessment of this pact, gentlemen. I submit to you that these visitors do not require our help in this war. I further submit that they have it within their powers to destroy Britain and take whatever they wish from Scotland or anywhere else. They were doing to us what we did to Uncle Joseph in 1940, keeping us out of the way until they're ready to deal with us. I say this to you, mein Führer. If you are resolved to do this thing, beware. Beware of what? Rommel took a particularly deep drag on his cigarette and exhaled a large cloud of smoke. Nothing in life is free. Everything has its price. One day, these allies, such as they are, will require payment. Let us hope that it is payment that we can afford to. And there you have it. That was Chapter 6 of Cloaks and Barbs. We'll do Chapter 7 tomorrow, among some other things. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and... Sorry, I'm just checking some messages real quick. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and bring this to a conclusion today. So on behalf of the staff here at Starbase One, wish you all a very good day. This is going to be a good day for me and Susan. And live long and prosper. And we'll talk again tomorrow.